Gang, what's up? Aaron, Canadian Looney. We're going to investigate more. We're learning and sharing with you the things that I see and learn about Canadian federal politics. Like, share, subscribe. This is going to be very informative. We've got Sean Buckley here. He's a lawyer that knows a lot about the Canadian Constitution. We've been reading it here. It's a long document, but man, oh man, once you get into it, you find out very early that you have no rights. You only have privileges. King Charles owns everything. It's wild. Like, the British Parliament can change the rules in Canada just like that. We'll listen to Sean Buckley here explain much deeper and articulately what our Canadian Constitution is really protecting. It's not you, it's them. Let's take a look.
Hey, that's something everyone can enjoy.
Like, you were talking about the Constitution, and for one, you kind of had me confused because I didn't even know Canada even has a Constitution. Do we even have a Constitution?
Well, I'll explain what we do have, and I think it'll shock people. And, this, maybe you should title this show, Forbidden Knowledge. And for those of you that, feel that you should only have knowledge the government wants you to have, then, turn the TV off. If I was, Corey and Ellen, I'll ask your audience and all of you out there, be honest. So how many of you have read the Canadian Constitution? And if we were all in a room together, I would see a few hands go up, like only a few. And then if I was to ask those few, I said, did you actually read the whole Constitution? I'm not talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a very small part of our Constitution, because many people have read our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is just a small part of the Constitution Act of 1982. So, but I'm hard pressed to find a Canadian, including lawyers, who have actually read our entire Constitution. Now, let's put this into perspective, because the most important law that governs your life is our Constitution. That's the document that sets out what each level of government can do. It sorts out basically how the government has control over your life, how the government has control over your land, how the government has control over everything. No document has more power over you, is more important to you in your entire life, and yet none of us have read it. And yet most of us, pretty well everyone watching this show, will have gone through at least 12 years of government-funded education. Even if we went to private school, the curriculum would have to be approved of by the government. And yet none of us have read the most important document governing our lives. And you really have to ask the question, why is it that I have not read the Canadian Constitution? And when you read it, you know why the government doesn't want you to read it. Because if I was to ask everyone watching, are we in a democracy? Is Canada a country? Does Parliament have authority over us? We believe things that have no basis in reality. So the first thing is, Corey, you asked what's a constitution? Well, in theory, a constitution is, a document or, set of documents that basically are our founding and primary laws that say, who can do what, So the U.S. Constitution starts with, we the people, and and creates different branches of government. So they've set themselves up as a republic, and they have separation of powers. So the courts are separate. The executive power is separate. The president is their executive power. So Congress and Senate will pass laws. That's the legislative branches. But who enforces those laws? Who applies those laws? That's the executive power. Do you know who the executive is in Canada? It might surprise people. We think, well, it's the federal parliament. That's where the executive power is. But according to our Constitution, the main part of which is the British North America Act of 1867, the king is our executive. Okay, the king of England, King Charles is our executive. Now, King Charles, to kind of exercise his executive power, has a committee that our Constitution establishes to advise His Majesty's government in Canada, the Privy Council Office. Has anyone watching this even heard of the Privy Council Office? If you were to ask me who the most powerful person in Canada is, I wouldn't say the Prime Minister, and I wouldn't say the Governor General and Council. I would answer and say, I think personally the most powerful person in Canada is the Clerk of the Privy Council Office, because it's the Privy Council Office that runs the Executive of Canada. And most of you haven't even heard of this office.
I don't even know who that is.
Now, the federal cabinet, the ministers, so the Prime Minister and the ministers, while they're sitting as cabinet ministers, are members of the Privy Council Office, but the Privy Council Office is made up of a whole bunch of people appointed by the King that are not elected representatives, who just continue through. You know, if Parliament passes a law, it's not law unless the Governor General signs it. Now, the Governor General is appointed by the King and is the King's representative. Do you know our members of Parliament, they swear an oath of allegiance to the King. They don't swear an oath of allegiance to the Constitution. And why would they? They don't swear an oath of allegiance to you and I. They swear an oath of allegiance to the King. Our judges swear an oath of allegiance to the King. So, and do you know even our Constitution itself is a collection of British statutes? Now let that sink in for a minute. So the Parliament in the United Kingdom, sitting in London, passes a law. So, you know, the first part of our Constitution Act is called the British North America Act of 1867. It's a statute passed by the British Parliament. You know, the second biggest part of our Constitution is the Constitution Act of 1982, which is a statute of the British Parliament. There's been a whole bunch of little amendments along the way. They're all statutes of the British Parliament or orders in council of the British Cabinet. So here we think we're a country, but our whole Constitution are British statutes that the United Kingdom Parliament can repeal, can amend. In fact, our Constitution doesn't allow us to do things that go against the UK Parliament. You know, most of us understand, let's say, you know, provinces have certain powers, and the provinces grant cities and other smaller entities like townships and municipalities certain powers. And the provincial government decides what powers it's going to allocate, and the provincial government changes that from time to time. The provincial government can take them all back. That's how Canada is as a, you know, so-called country. Basically, the United Kingdom Parliament has granted us certain rights and can take them away. So isn't that interesting? And we're not taught that. So everything governing us are just British statutes that the British Parliament can change at any time. Our King is the executive. Corey and Alan, who is the head of our armed forces? Who do our armed forces answer to? It's really clear in our Constitution. It names the person that runs our armed forces. Do you know who that is?
I know this one. Yeah, I know this one. King Charles.
King Charles.
Yeah.
So the federal government isn't head of the Canadian military. Our King is head of the Canadian military. And if we go to the King's court saying, wait a second, the military should be answering to those people we elected who then swear allegiance to the King, meaning our Parliament. It shouldn't be the King directly. It should just be those we've elected to swear allegiance to the King, understanding that the King, you know, can basically, you know, annul their laws. Well, the court's going to side with the Constitution. The law is clear. The King is head of our armed forces. And, you know, even our rights and freedoms that, you know, and they aren't rights, because a right is so found in our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. A right is something that can't be taken away from you. right? So a right is something that can't be taken away from you. Like, so, the three of us are adults. We have the right to go out after 10 p.m. if we want. Like that, well, I guess that could be taken away from the government, and it has. But I'm thinking more of a parent-child role. When I had teenagers, let's say we had a 10 o'clock curfew. Well, it wasn't a right. If they got out of hand and I grounded them, they knew it was a privilege, right? It wasn't something inherent to them. And even though we have on paper, in theory, all these great rights, there's a limitation. The government, it's subject to the government saying, no, I'm justified in this case in taking away your rights. So we don't have rights. We have privileges. And, it is true the courts can decide, the extent of those privileges. But we don't have rights. And even that document only applies in the very narrow sense to government. But, government gets out of it by basically subcontracting to others. And one of the cases that come to mind is you guys did a show on Sheila Lewis, who testified at the National Citizens Inquiry, and she needed an organ transplant to survive. And this was during COVID. She had taken all of the other vaccines a second time to qualify, but she wasn't willing to take the COVID-19 vaccine. She didn't believe that was going to be good for her health. And she had been tested. She had already had COVID and had such a strong immune response. She had so many antibodies that she was one of those people that it would have been dangerous to take the vaccine because she already had a very strong immune response. But why would you take a vaccine when you already are immune? But a group of 4 doctors said, no, because you won't take this shot, go home and die, which is what happened. But she goes to court saying, no, I have the right to life under our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 7. I have the right to life. And the court said, yeah, but they're not government. So think about this, the Supreme Court of Canada said, no, the government can make it illegal for us to have private health care. So she can't hire doctors within Canada to give her the surgery she needs to live. So the only option is the government-funded health care. All these doctors are paid for by government, but they're not government. So she has no right to her life because the charter doesn't apply to doctors that she has to, by law, access. She has no other choice, who are paid for by government, but that's not government. So even that's absolutely limited. And, so we basically have this system where, we're subject to the British Parliament. The king, if we pass a law that the king doesn't like, the Governor General doesn't have to sign it, and it's not law. And even if the Governor General agrees to sign it, the king has under our Constitution, under those British statutes, within 2 years can just annul a law. But, the Privy Council and the king run the show. So, the whole thing's a facade. I mean, we say we live in a democracy. Well, what's a democracy? Isn't that the will of the people? But yet, you and I and everyone watching this, we don't get to vote on important things. Europe wants a war because they're bankrupt and they likely need a currency reset. And every time in history we're there, somebody starts a war, so that can be blamed and not all the deliberate policy mistakes along the way. So we could be on the verge of a war. Well, we're not going to get to vote on that. We're not going to get to vote on whether there's conscription, whether the government can force our children to go and kill other people and be killed by other people. I mean, it's not just be killed by other people. I mean, the government can force us. I mean, Ukraine is conscripting people my age because they're so desperate right now.
Sean, if I could just ask you a question. I hate to interrupt, but
please do though.
I want to ask, well, what about the Commonwealth? I guess my understanding always was that we broke away from the king and being under the British system and became a member of the Commonwealth, which kind of like was kind of like related to the kingship, the royalty and whatever, but they were just a figure. They had no power or authority over us. So what is the Commonwealth then if we don't have freedom from the British?
Well, I mean, I think the Commonwealth is a great marketing thing to make us all happy and think that we're part of some big family, and yet, somehow we're separate. But, we're separate in the way that, the city of Edmonton is separate from the province of Alberta. The province of Alberta has passed a law giving the citizen of the city of Edmonton certain powers, but the legislature in Alberta can take those powers away or change them. And that's Canada's situation. So the United Kingdom Parliament, has granted the Dominion of Canada, which all the land belongs to the King. So do you understand that? So at law, even though you may have bought a house and paid off your mortgage, the King still owns your land. You just have what's called a fee simple. So basically, that's just a right granted by the King to occupy the land, and simple means without restriction. Although, you might have some utility easements and the like on your property. There may be some restrictions, but vis-a-vis the King, we're granted what's called a fee simple, but you don't own your land. And we all know the government can take our land away. And I can assure you that the government is planning on taking your land away. So, but don't worry, it's not yours anyway. It just, it's kind of give unto Caesar that which belongs to Caesar. So give to, King Charles that which belongs to King Charles. But I mean, most people are even shocked by that. So to answer your question, Alan, I mean, the Commonwealth, wonderful idea, right? Especially when there was more freedom of movement and, we have the Commonwealth Games and things like that, and we all feel like we're all part of some big happy family. Yes, we're all part of the British Empire, which has granted countries like Canada and Australia certain privileges, much like a province grants cities certain privileges, but totally subject to the empire centered in London. But for marketing purposes, we all believe we're a country. We all believe we're free. What I'm saying to the audience today, most people will never have heard of. And again, like it's Corey, I've never heard of the Privy Council Office. Well, of course you haven't heard of the Privy Council Office, because that's not going to market well. That's not going to market well. You see, it's easier to control us if we believe we have some modicum of control over our lives. But we don't. Like literally, the government could pass a law conscripting us, the three of us, under threat of death, if we won't go and kill other people that we don't know and that we don't want to kill, and be killed. Like they have absolute power of life and death over us. We are the king's serfs, truly. Like, tell me how, I used to think, Middle Ages, people were serfs on the land. Literally, the landlord controlled their lives. Well, likely those serfs had to spend less of their time working for the landlord than we end up working for all the levels of government. Because it's not just the taxes we pay, which for most of us, when you add in sales tax and income tax and a fee for this and a fee for that, is over 50% of our income. But we're also obligated to spend a lot of our time complying with these laws. So each of us every year, we have to renew our car insurance. We have to renew our driver's license. We have to do our taxes. Like these are just ones to come to mind, but the obligations so it's the government not just takes our money, but takes our time, which takes away from our ability to earn a living. And also, you've got to be a balanced person. So likely we're worse than serfs in the Middle Ages, but certainly the government has likely more control over our lives than the feudal landlord had over the serfs. And yet we believe we're the freest people ever.
Sean, we got like 2 minutes. Quickly, there's going to be some people watching this. They've known this because they're older, right? I know the older generation was very aware of the monarchy and all that kind of stuff. The younger generation has no idea. And a lot of us is like, this has been a really good reminder because we see that we are living a facade. Canada sometimes doesn't feel like a real country. And basically you're saying we're not. And here's why. 60 seconds. What can we do about this? What should we do? What do you think our options are? Because it sounds like we don't have many.
Yeah, that's a tough question. So step one is just find out the truth. So, I mean, I actually share this episode with as many people as you can, so at least people come to understand we don't have what you think we have. And then Corey, I think God's going to move us into a different system based on different principles. Like this idea that the government has basically control over every aspect of our life. And we've just got this illusion of rights when really all we have is privileges that, the extent of those will depend on, basically the needs of the government, not the needs of the people. That's not the freedom God envisioned. Like, the first and second commandments, when we based our societies on those, we were the freest. And so we need to get back to the first and second commandments. If a law is not loving your brother like yourself, it's a false law.
Amen.
So you're saying we need like a Moses type dude to kind of come set the people free, man. We need to like a mass exodus to set the people free.
I don't know how God's going to do it, but I know that, I think people should be praying that God will reveal truth to the nation of Canada and just be broad, because it's not just this area. The level of, belief in things that are not real is astronomical. And so for us to be free, we literally need God to shine light into the darkness. And that's something I pray for, and I'm inviting your audience to pray that God will shine light into Canada, reveal truth, and then and to reveal himself. And then he never acts like we expect anyway. So let's just trust that.
I think he's done that, because through COVID, I heard it multiple times. You don't have a right. This is a privilege. That has come up. You know what I mean? That kind of terminology. So I think he is kind of poking some holes through the veil so that we are starting to see the truth. Anyway, Sean, we really appreciate you.
Real quick, yes or no? Can we then have a vote to become a sovereign nation?
I'm going to have to ask the king. Yeah, and just short answer. I mean, the Supreme Court of Canada, it did go up to them during the Quebec thing. And in theory, if you have a reasonable majority, that should at least create a legal obligation on Canada to negotiate with the province, whatever that means. So I think it's clear as mud. Would His Majesty give up the province of Alberta?
Oh, yeah. We'll wrap it up right there, gang. Aaron, Canadian Looney, sharing with you the things that I'm learning about Canadian federal politics. We watch the committee meetings. We watch question period. We watch the House of Commons floor. We cover all the scrums, legacy media. We cover, I guess, independent media as well. It's the only place you can really seem to get information that's accurate, besides watching the frontline politics in the House of Commons and the committee meetings, the scrums. That's it. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you learned something. If you did, like, share, subscribe. If you didn't and just enjoyed the video, like, share, subscribe, and click one of the other ones that are floating around here. We'll catch you in the next video. Thank you very much for watching this one. Ciao for now. We'll catch you in the next video. Please like, share, subscribe.